Great. Good afternoon, everybody. Thank you for being here in person and watching online on our live stream on YouTube. My name is Daryl Mathers. I'm the communication specialist here at Ontario Shores. I'm proud to introduce our next segment and part of Mental Health and Recovery Day at Ontario Shores, but a couple of housekeeping items before I do that. It's Mental Illness Awareness Month in October, and obviously this is part of recognizing not only the journey, but the recovery of people with mental illness and sharing some inspiring stories. We had a youth mental health panel earlier today, and this evening we're going to talk about family and mental health and its impact on families with a panel at 7 o'clock. So if you're able to make it or join online, we would greatly welcome that. You'll see, for those of you who are in person, you'll see a QR code on the back of the chairs here. That is a survey just to help us measure the impact of the recovery stories that we are sharing and might inform some future events that we plan to host here at Ontario Shores. So if you could click on the QR code now and then also do it at the end of the presentation, that would be also greatly appreciated. I'm going to introduce our keynote speaker. I've been trying to sort out how to introduce James Jefferson because I actually know him personally, and it was only by happenstance that I actually came across his story. And when we have done these stories in the past, they're always inspiring to see people and hear about what they've gone through. It's always impressive, and it helps everybody, not just me, but remember why we're here, whether we're a nurse in a unit or working in a support role or whatever the case may be. The impact that this organization and the ones like it throughout the province and people who work in mental health, the impact that they have on people. And seeing somebody and then hearing their story, it was really moving, and it was great to have him as a guest on the podcast and then have him here today. And I hope you're as inspired by his story as I was and continue to be. So without further ado, I'd like to welcome Constable James Jefferson. He's a 14-year police service veteran, and he's the current wellness coordinator at the Greater Sudbury Police Service. After being involved in a fatal shooting early in his career, James endured the fallout of PTSD. After years of suppression and hiding in plain sight, trauma forced James off work for a period of more than 3 years. Through his tireless work ethic, James was able to heal from his trauma, return to policing, and transform PTSD into purpose by becoming a mental health advocate and helping others. So please join me in welcoming Constable James Jefferson.
Hello. It is an absolute honor and pleasure to be with you today. So my name is James Jefferson, and a little about myself. 42 years old. I am a husband. I've been married 14 years to the love of my life. I'm a father. I have the privilege of raising 2 amazing young women, 11 and 4. I'm also a police officer. I've been working as a police officer with the Greater Sudbury Police Service for the last 14 years. Along with that, I'm a PTSD and suicide survivor. Now, post-traumatic stress brought me to depths in life that I never thought I was capable of seeing. And after years of simply surviving in life, hanging on by a thread, I was finally forced to be honest with myself and say those 3 words I was so afraid to say. I need help. By saying this, it brought me to a crossroad where I had to make a choice. Be defined by the diagnosis or defy the diagnosis. Now, I was hired as a police officer in 2008. And right from the onset, as soon as I hit the ground running in that profession, I quickly established myself as a worker, someone highly successful, highly competent. This was my dream job, my dream profession. This was my purpose in life. And it wasn't before long, because of my competency and success, I was partnered with another officer who was just like me, a high riser. And it wasn't before long that we very quickly established ourselves as that go-to car on our platoon. And if you'll pardon my language, in policing terms, we call that the shit magnet. But we reveled in that responsibility and that purpose. We were always first out, first on the road, first on scene. That was who we were. And in the first 2 years of working in this capacity, it was bliss. Like I said, I was living my dream. I could not believe I was getting paid to do this job. But despite that, my eyes were open to the seemingly infinite capabilities of humanity. Death, destruction, hate, chaos, violence. It can be a very dark and scary world in some places. But none of it ever affected me. The remnants of those experiences never trickled within me and became a part of me. I had a line drawn in the sand of work and home. And I thought this was my career. It would be a steady ascent of success, of competency, of promotion. But little did I know that just past the 2-year mark of being a police officer, I would face a call and an experience that forever altered the course of my life. It was December 29th, 2010. We were working our 4th straight night shift, 12 a.m. to 8 a.m. And it was busy. And once again, my partner and I were first on the road. And that's when the call came in. A man called in saying he had just stabbed and killed his roommate. And my partner and I were the only car available. So we went. And when we got there, you expect, pulling up on a call like this, loudness and chaos. You expect people to be running around, but when we got there, it was silence. It was a dark, cold Sudbury night. There was no traffic, no foot traffic. The only thing that caught your attention was your breath, because your adrenaline and your heart was pumping so much on what you were stepping into. We had to break down multiple doors to get into the apartment. And once we were inside, we saw that the homicide was valid, in that a murder had just occurred. And the person responsible for this act made the fateful choice to come at my partner and I with the knife that he had used. And you see, this is a classic suicide by police scenario. And we were at a point of no retreat. We had nowhere to go. And we were faced with that ultimate decision that I wouldn't wish upon anyone. Use lethal force and save your life. And that's what we were presented with. He made no gestures at stopping. It was very clear the intent was to kill or be killed. And we were forced to open fire on him. And after the bullets rang out, smell of gunpowder filled the air. He was quickly handcuffed and the cavalry rolled in. I felt like every officer in our department was running in that apartment. And I was quickly grabbed by one of my supervisors, my partner by another officer, and we were brought up to the hospital just for observation, just for assessment. And my partner was brought to a back room. I was put in front of one of the operating rooms. And at 2 years on, when you're told, sit here, don't say anything, especially after what I've just been through, that's what you're going to do. You're going to sit here and not say anything. And moments passed, and I heard a commotion to my right. And I was in complete disbelief in what I was watching. The man that I had just encountered, the man that I had just shot, being wheeled into the stretcher directly in front of me, placed in the operating room directly across from me. And now I had a front row seat. It felt like an out-of-body experience. It really did. And I could hear the medical staff trying to revive him. And I remember that distinct moment when I heard the doctor say, time of death. It was like a punch in the stomach. I felt the air cut in my lungs. I could not believe this was my reality. I'm a very loving person. This goes really against who I am. And the only thing I could utter at the time was, I guess I killed him. I remained at the hospital for a few more hours. Then I had the challenge of going home and waking up my 6-month pregnant wife with our first child and to tell her what just happened. She took one look at me and she said, "What's wrong?" And imagine your husband coming home or wife coming home as a police officer saying, "I've just killed someone." It was an emotional moment for the both of us. And as the dust settled, I began my self-talk. I began to tell myself, I did as I was trained to do. This is all part of the job. I signed up for this. And then those three dangerous words, I am fine. But I wasn't fine. But I was extremely prideful, highly ambitious. And I believed if I let it be known that I was suffering as a result of this experience, I would be judged and labeled. I would be thought of as weak or as broken. I felt it would halt any career advancement aspirations that I had had. So I wore that mask, a perceived strength, and hid in plain sight. And I put far more value into my career, my reputation, and my longing for promotion way ahead of my mental health and that of my family. In the year following that event, two monumental things happened in my life. I became a parent for the first time, having a little girl 3 months later. And shortly after that, I was promoted into our drug unit as a detective with less than 3 years on. And although I was achieving both my family and career aspirations at a very rapid rate, I was unraveling at the seams. I began to experience emotions, symptoms, thoughts, and feelings that were all very foreign to me. That deep, dark depression. If you've been through it, that's all I got to say, and you know what that's like. That overwhelming anxiety, a fear like I've never experienced. Flashbacks, reoccurring nightmares where I was simply afraid to go to sleep because I knew there was a battle waiting for me the moment I drifted off. Hitting my wife in my sleep, yelling and screaming. To the point where I had suicidal ideations. And if I was not fueled by the negative symptomology that I know now to be post-traumatic stress, I also suffered from numbness. I couldn't feel anything towards life. Imagine holding your firstborn daughter for the very first time, and you can't conjure up a feeling. There is just nothingness. Imagine the internal guilt that you would have. So to alleviate that numbness, I would drink. I would drink excessively if I had to socialize. I would drink to be able to sleep. But I'd also drink just to forget. And definitely my marriage began to feel the repercussions of my inherent denial and suppression. Because I put up walls to keep my wife out. Because in my self-serving way of thinking, I thought I was protecting her from the monster I believed I was becoming. But little did I know, I was guiding her on a path towards trauma. Path towards darkness, where she would get to see the rapid change and decline of the man she loves without any communication, any context. She did not know what she was walking into. And my marriage suffered greatly as a result. The communication suffered. So I leaned on my rubber crutch. I worked. I could not control my home life. I could not communicate properly. But I sure as hell can go to work and make good, quick, decisive decisions. I was good at what I did when I put that badge on. It was black and white. There was no interpretation. It was easy. It was my crutch. And I would work 400 to 600 hours overtime a year, 24, 48-hour shifts, call-outs. I lived and worked this drug lifestyle. And being a part of this elite unit as the drug unit, it really amplified and facilitated two needs that had developed within me as a result of my trauma. And the first was a need for adrenaline. I chased the adrenaline rush. I chased danger because it allowed me to feel something. It brought me out of that numbness, out of that dark depression, even just for a moment. So I put myself in harm's way as often as I could. I was reckless with my own safety. I pursued undercover work, and I started doing undercover drug buys in my own city. Not very smart. If you'll imagine buying crack cocaine at noon at your local mall in the food court and then being there 6 hours later with your 3-year-old, probably not the best situation to be in, especially when you're dealing with social anxiety and hypervigilance. But that adrenaline rush gave me that euphoria. That was my drug. And I suppose the second need, which is an obvious byproduct or escalation to chasing that adrenaline, was a death wish. I aspired to die in the line of duty. I said it to coworkers, which there was no follow-up. Maybe that's a red flag when you got someone saying that to you, but nothing. Every day I looked in the mirror, I saw myself as weak. I felt as though I was living double life. I was living a lie. I was presenting strong, but inside, I was breaking by the moment. And I believed if I died in the line of duty, one, my secret would be kept, and I would be immortalized as strong, always thought of as a hero, someone who died for a greater purpose. That was more important to me than admitting I was not okay. And I struggled immensely in this place. Time and time again, putting myself in these situations, time and time again, wishing for death. But call it training, call it ability, call it divine intervention. But obviously death never came. But it all came to a culmination on one specific night. Now, I had thought about suicide for quite some time. And it got to a point that it was every single day. I researched it. I tried to find the best ways, least amount of pain, quickest method. I thought about the letters I would write, where I would do it, who would find me first. I was formulating my plan. And no one knew. And on this specific night, it was about 4 years after my shooting, I was in my plainclothes car. We were on surveillance, and it was a cold, dark Sudbury night. And the pain had won out. I believe post-traumatic stress was the be-all of end-all of who I was, and I felt powerless to stop its progression. I could no longer wake up with that weight on my shoulders, that depression sitting there waiting for me to open my eyes and remind me, how are you going to get through today? You don't want to be here. I felt this who I was. This is who I was. And it was going to be my demise. And I made that fateful choice on that night. I was going to take my life. So I unloaded my firearm. I put it to my head. I squeezed the trigger because I needed to prime myself, get myself ready. I then loaded it, and I can almost still feel the coldness of the muzzle pressed against my temple. Finger on the trigger, tears rolling down my face. And of all things, praying to God for the strength to pull it. And I can tell you in that moment, my prayer was answered. But it wasn't the prayer that I had asked for. It was the prayer I needed. And my daughter came to mind. And I began to think about what outcome this act would have on her life. How I would be escaping my trauma, but I would inevitably be handing off trauma to my daughter, to carry, to bear, to burden. Suicide would always be a prevalent and painful topic in her life. Always clinging to childhood memories, trying to remember who I was. Always asking the question of why. Taking all this in that moment, I realized I couldn't do it. Suicide couldn't be an option. I had to completely take that option off the table because I had to bear the burden of trauma so my daughter did not have to. That was my motivation. That kept me going. And bear the burden I did. I worked a few years more, battling crippling depression, crippling anxiety. I drank excessively. I smoked excessively. My marriage was on the rocks. But I knew how to work and live this sometimes toxic first responder police lifestyle far better than I knew how to ask for help. And I would have kept going. And I can guarantee you, it would have been a tragic ending. In some way, shape, or form, I would not be standing here right now. Fortunately, life had other plans. And I suffered a physical injury on the job. I ruptured my calf and my Achilles in a charity basketball game. Thank God it was a work charity basketball game because I was covered under WSIB. But it was the very first time since the shooting, since having a daughter, since being promoted, since being in training as an undercover officer, year after year of go, go, go. Life now abruptly stopped. And I had that silence and that stillness in my life. And anyone with unresolved trauma, they will tell you that silence can be deafening. And that stillness can create mania in your mind. And the mind can operate a lot like water. It could flow or it can crash. And mine crashed. Everything that I tried to suppress for years, tried to bury, tried to exercise off, sleep off, drink off, smoke off, was now at the forefront of my mind. And it was an overwhelming flood. And that began my descent to rock bottom. So I spent a total of 3.5 years off work because of my PTSD. In the first 2 years, I could say I spent in total darkness. I developed a cannabis addiction. I was using cannabis from the moment I woke up to the moment I went to bed. I did not have a sober moment in 2 years. If I did not have my drug, I was going through withdrawals. I was raging. It was not a pretty sight, but I was fully addicted. I couldn't leave my house. The only place I could go to in the run of a day was the gym down the street, but it never got easier. It was always a buildup. It was always a push to get in there. But other than that, leaving my house, there's danger waiting for me. Something bad is going to happen. That worst case scenario was all my mind would allow me to think. I had pushed away all my friends because people will eventually give up. It's unfortunate, but if you push someone off long enough, eventually they'll take that as some kind of hint and they'll leave you to it. And I was left alone. When I was working, I was very popular. My wife used to ask me, can you just put your phone away? It won't stop going off. And in 2 years of being off work, I could put that phone down and it wouldn't make a sound in a week. My marriage was just about over. We were talking divorce. We couldn't go a day without arguing. And if we weren't arguing, we weren't speaking. We were speaking just to co-parent. And I can remember my rock bottom moment. I was downstairs playing with my daughter one morning. My wife had already left for work. We had our standard morning argument because if you get PTSD, you wake up sometimes with an agenda. You're just angry. And during this texting conversation that we were having, she abruptly stopped. And all she said was, I can't do this anymore. I want a separation. And that's when it hit me. I was willing, without knowing it, willing to lose my career. I was willing to lose my friendships. I was willing to lose whatever life I had made for myself up until this point, but I was not willing to lose my wife and my child. That was my last straw. And I said to my daughter at the moment, stay here. Dad's going to go upstairs for a minute. Please don't come. And I rushed up the stairs as fast as I could, trying to hold back the emotion. And as soon as I passed her line of sight and was upstairs, I collapsed. I pressed both hands over my mouth as hard as I could so my daughter could not hear her grown father crying to that extent. What a profound pain we can feel to bring us to our knees. And I made a decision. on that rock bottom floor, I was not going to lose them. And I learned something about rock bottom. There is collateral beauty on that rock bottom floor. There really is. Because there's only one way to go but up. I was down on that floor. Finally, I had an answer. Which way do I go? What do I do? Just go. And when you make a decision like that in life, and people do it all the time. People will say, I'm not smoking anymore. Put that cigarette down. That's it. They'll say, I'm going to lose all this weight. All of a sudden, they're in the gym every day. They change their lives. Good things take time. Great things happen in an instant. And when you make a decision like that in life, there's a redemptive quality to it that can carry you through those trials and tribulations, through that darkness into the light. And I made that decision. I was not going to look back. Nothing else mattered from this point forward. So the first step for me was therapy. The challenge was, I was in therapy since my shooting. I was in therapy for the last 5, 6, 7 years. But I never got better. I progressively got worse, but I never put any thought into my therapy. I didn't realize that I was in the driver's seat. I was walking into these sessions. I was dictating what I wanted to share, how deep I wanted to go. And we are a survival species. We do not like to put ourselves through pain. So we will unconsciously, subconsciously protect ourselves. And I was going to these therapy sessions talking about surface level issues. If I had an argument with my wife, that's what I was talking about. If I was frustrated at work, that's what I was talking about. But everything that was going awry in my life had an underlying cause, a root cause, a trauma that we weren't touching on. I was not being pushed in my therapy. So I had to find somebody else. Feels like a breakup when you leave a doctor after that amount of time. You feel like you failed a little bit. But I needed a different method, a different approach. And I tried a few, and I kept striking out. And then I caught wind of a program at CAMH. It was a 1-week outpatient program for first responders with trauma. And I had begged WSIB for months. Please put this in. I need this, I need this, I need this. It was no, 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 no. Then finally that no turned into a yes. And I went to this program and I met this doctor. And she pushed me for that week. We did exposure therapy. I lived in my trauma for that whole week. I immersed myself as deep as I possibly could. And during that week, I said, yes, this is it. This is a doctor. This is the equation I need. I need to be pushed. And she agreed to stay with me. She agreed to take me on as a client. And we worked together once a week, every week for a full year. And she pushed me every single week. I cried every single week. But the more I did it, the stronger I was becoming. She taught me that it's okay. She taught me self-love. And because of that, I laid my first puzzle piece of healing to deal with my moral guilt. I sought out a chaplain. Now, my moral guilt came because I did exactly what they tell you not to do. And after my shooting experience, I read all the obituaries. I read all the condolences. And I learned that the man whose life I took had a daughter. And his daughter was the light of his life. And she was a daddy's girl. That's all I saw in the condolences. So I never saw myself as an officer who saved his own life and that of his partners. I never saw myself as a hero that some people claimed me to be. I saw myself as someone who took a father away from a daughter. And I wore that for years. So I needed a spiritual outlet. I'm not a religious person. I don't identify with a particular religion. I don't go to church. I do believe in God. I believe in living right, and that's how I live. And I went to this church to meet this chaplain. I told her my story. I told her the journey I was now on of progress and healing. We talked. We cried. She read me Bible scripture. She blessed me with holy water from Jerusalem and gifted me with Himalayan praying beads. It was a beautiful experience. And then she prayed for me. And at first she said, I'm going to pray for your strength in your journey. And then one of those life-altering moments happened. She held me by the hand. She looked me deep in the eye. And she said, I'm also going to pray for your forgiveness. But not your forgiveness from God, because you don't need that, because you've always had it. I am praying for your ability to forgive yourself. And that hit me. I finally got it. That I was putting all this guilt on myself and I didn't deserve it. And because of that moment, I wasn't going to church the next Sunday. I was still the same person, but I had this takeaway. I had this newfound forgiveness for myself, and I laid another piece of healing. And I started to build momentum in my journey. And I realized it was the habits and rituals that I applied every single day. That was going to be the catalyst to get me out of this. That was going to change me. So fitness and nutrition was a daily staple point. Okay? The mind takes time, the body's instant. If you're suffering through mental health, okay, fitness, exercise, nutrition, that is a natural anti-anxiety, anti-depression med. Instant. I knew the cause and effect of living a healthy lifestyle. I would feel a little better. So if I can control this one small aspect of my life, why would I not do that for myself? Why would I not give myself that fighting chance? So every day was the gym. Every day was good food, because that was just effort. Next was being mindful who I surrounded myself with. A lot of my friends were police officers, and maybe they're not the most positive people at times. Right? I was on an uphill climb. I couldn't have people bringing me down. I had to put up boundaries with people who are taking away my energy, people that were impacting me negatively. I love you, I care for you, I'll be back. But right now, I'm on a journey of healing, so I gotta have some distance. And I started to seek out people that I thought were positive, people that gave me energy, people that uplifted me. Then it was being mindful of what was I taking in every single day. Our minds are sponges. And at the time, when I was really struggling, and I'm sure some of you can attest, when you're sad, you're depressed, you listen to depressing music. Right? It validates it. It allows you to live in that moment. It amplifies the feeling. Or you're angry, angry music. Watching programming with violence, books, all play an impact. So I thought to myself, why could I not apply the same approach with weightlifting and bodybuilding to the mind? Because in bodybuilding and weightlifting, progressive overload. If you lift for a certain amount of time, you continually add more weight. The body has no choice but to adapt. The bones will grow denser, muscles, ligaments stronger to support that added weight. Our body is a survival mechanism. So why can't I do that with the mind? If I apply enough pressure to my mind with positive content, positive messaging, positive speakers, eventually it will have to become a part of me. And the toxic aspects of trauma, I would hope, would leave. And that's what I did. I became religious with what I was listening to. Speakers, podcasts, books, shows, anything that lifted me up. I was investing myself in what I was putting in my mind. And it went right to the most minute detail. How often do you look at your phones in the run of a day? So I said, I'm going to have something on my phone that's a constant reminder. And I had it on my phone for about 6 years. Caught a lot of flack from my wife because she said, why don't you have pictures of us and the kids? But I needed this. And it was just a simple quote that said, I did not come this far to only come this far. I wanted to look at that 50, 60, 70 times a day as a reminder. And in doing this every single day, these habits and rituals, eventually it became a part of me. And I started to master my self-talk. I started to talk to myself for the first time with real compassion, real empathy, humanizing myself and validating, it's okay what you're going through. You'll get through it. It allowed me to be mindful here in a moment. This is where we want to be. We know past is depression, future is anxiety. One is memory, one is imagination. Both exist here as long as we let them. So I made it a point just to be here. And I started to heal immensely. But I still had one big hurdle. being out in public, being around people, being in uncomfortable situations. Sure, it was easy to heal and be home with my loving family and say everything is magical. But the moment I'm out at Costco on a Saturday, oh my God, the world is coming to an end. So I had to put myself in those situations. I conducted my own exposures because I made the choice to choose the power of progression over the power of trauma and anxiety. And I systematically desensitized myself, starting small and building until I can be in Costco on a Saturday and be completely relaxed. What a liberating feeling to shed that weight of anxiety and fear. But this process took a full year of immersion in myself every single day. And in coming full circle, by year's end, I was no longer in therapy. I was discharged. You're healed. I was no longer on any medication. The trauma from my past became merely a chapter in the book of my life and no longer the prelude. I was able to heal my marriage where we're more in love now than we've ever been. And because of that, we were able to have a second girl who I refer to as the product of our healing, because we would have never had this child if I remained sick. And by the end of that year, I was able to use my trauma, return to work, and create a job within my service to help those suffering through mental health, to be that soundboard, to be that support, to be that guide. Because it is a scary endeavor and journey doing this by yourself. So I got to do that. And I can tell you, I've worked in this capacity for the last 3 years. I've seen a lot of mental health. I've seen a lot of PTSD in the policing profession. I lost a friend to suicide. I've dealt with a lot of suicidality. But I have also heard on more than one occasion, frankly several, the expression, "You saved my life." Now, I'm not saying this to impress you, but to impress upon you that I failed time and time again in my journey. But that is why I succeeded, because I never stopped trying to try. And I never stopped hoping for hope. And through that ascent, through that succession of transforming trauma into growth, I formulated my blueprint. My rules that govern me to ensure I always walk with my head high. I never walk into that dark place. And I hope there will be something, a takeaway for yourself today, that something resonates with you. And they're as follows. Number one, if you're going to take a journey into your own mind, make sure you bring someone with you. If you're suffering through mental health, if you're struggling, if you're suffering, the same thinking that gets you here is not going to be the same thinking that gets you out. We stay in our own minds to be right, to be safe. When we talk to someone suitable, we open ourselves up to guidance and perspective on our path and our journey. Don't get it twisted. Talking to someone is the strong move. Suppression is the easy way out, but suppression works until it doesn't. I can guarantee you that. It will find its way out in some way, shape, or form when you least expect it and you are least prepared for it. So start that conversation with someone. Number two, progress is pain. Know that going in. We seem to think that progress is this linear journey of A to B where you're just constantly going to feel better. I'm doing the right things. It magically I will feel better. You won't. You'll actually feel worse for a little while. The journey of progress hurts more than being in the trauma because trauma ends up being predictable and eerily comforting in some ways. But progress is scary. It's unknown. It's putting yourself through exposures. It's talking and being raw and transparent. It's attacking those triggers and those stuck points that you have. So be willing to endure the peaks and valleys of that journey. And always choose the pain of progress over the pain of trauma, because you're already going to be in pain. Get something for it. Number 3, always be on guard at the doorway of your own mind. Now, there's a story of a grandfather and his grandson. And the grandfather says to the grandson, inside every one of us is a battle of 2 wolves. One wolf is every positive emotion and thought. The other wolf is every negative emotion and thought. And the grandson asked the grandfather, which wolf wins the fight? To his response, whichever one you feed. If you feed your mind positivity, you will feel it. It's energy. You feed it negativity, best believe you'll feel it. I go back to listening to that depressing music when you're depressed, right? Amplifies it. Number 4, self-talk is your lifeline. Okay? Master it. We spend the majority of time in our own minds. So I pose this question and thought onto yourself. How do you talk to yourself when life gets hard? Maybe when you screw up, maybe when you fail. How do you talk to yourself? And be honest. We have to be raw and transparent with yourself, because we can lie to ourselves. It's very easy to do. But if you're honest with yourself, how do you talk to yourself? Do you bring yourself up? Or do you call yourself names, put yourself down? But what if the person you love the most in the world came to you with that exact same problem? Would you think about it differently? Would you process it? Would you support it differently? I never let myself be allowed to suffer from mental health. But if someone came to me with that same problem, I would give them as much compassion, empathy that I possibly could. It's okay to be okay. We'll get through it. This will take time, but you're not alone. You have to give yourself that same love in your self-talk. Okay? Number 5, live out of appreciation, not expectation. You have gratitude in your life, real gratitude. And I don't mean for the trips or the materialistic things. I mean for the people in your life that you value. Even just to be able to breathe, even just to be able to walk around in the sun and experience this world. Do you find gratitude daily? Or are you just going through the motions? Gratitude is a superpower. And I tell you, this expression alone was one of the catalysts of saving my marriage. Because I learned that because of trauma, I was living in the realm of expectation. I couldn't love myself. I couldn't comfort myself. I couldn't say the right things to myself. But if my wife did it, oh, that felt good. Another drug, give me more of that. When you comfort me, I feel okay for a moment. So I expected more. I expected her to do it all the time. Even the times I really didn't deserve it, I expected her to comfort me and say the right thing, essentially setting her up to fail. And when I would look at her, because I was living in this realm of thinking, every time I saw her, it was what I was expecting and what I wasn't getting met. She doesn't understand me. She's not supporting me. So I had to change the script, change the perspective, and live through appreciation. Now, I put into practice every time I saw her. This is the woman who married me, the woman who had my child, the woman who was still here when she had every reason to run for the hills. True gratitude. And we live our marriage through this perspective. Number 6, connection drives life. The people you surround yourself with, you become. So take value and take notice. Who's your inner circle? Who do you surround yourself with? Because it's all energy. People can take it. People can give it. And I'll give you a very quick example of the people you surround yourself with, what it can do. I had 2 close friends years ago who, when I was having marital difficulties, I confided in them. My one friend had a very strong marriage, a lot of values. My other friend had a very rocky marriage. The friend with the strong marriage, he would force me to be empathetic. He would tell me when I was in the wrong. He would try to get me to think of my wife's perspective, the whole picture of what's going on. The friend with the rocky marriage, oh, you're right. She's wrong. This is unfair. But he was projecting his own marriage onto me. his energy onto me. So be mindful of the people that are around you. Seek people that'll lift you up. Create boundaries if you got to create boundaries. But I can guarantee you, you hang on with 4 negative people, you'll be the 5th. And you don't want that to happen. But on the other side of the spectrum, don't adapt to the energy in the room, be that energy in the room. Number 7, define your outcomes and define your shoulds and your musts. Now, we all have shoulds and musts in our life. And some of them have been ingrained since the day we were born. You must brush your teeth because if you don't, they'll rot and fall out. You must practice proper hygiene because if you don't, you'll smell. Or as we get older, you must go to work or you'll get fired. You won't get a paycheck. You'll be homeless. There's so many aspects. And we just accept these as shoulds. And not every day we want to go to work. But we do because it is a non-negotiable contract with ourselves. It's a should. Or it's a must, I should say. And shoulds, you'll talk yourself out of shoulds all day long. I should exercise. I should eat better. Majority of the time, that'll rule you. I must. Right? So define your shoulds and your musts in your life. I must go work out. I must eat right. I must make that call. I must go to my therapy session. It's only going to benefit you. So pay specific attention to that. And define your outcomes. Why are you doing this? Are you doing this just on autopilot? Are you blindly going through the motions? Or are you trying to get something from it? Define your outcomes, give you clarity. And last, number 10, win the moment. Simplify your life. Focus on what you can control. Life can be big, life can be overwhelming at times, but if you simplify it, and you simply just win a moment, then you win a moment after that, you create momentum. Momentum creates progress. Progress creates motivation and inspiration. So simply bring it down to just that moment and be here and invest. Because the past and the future doesn't exist, truly. Just right here, right now, this is all you have. So I want to finish with 2 thoughts, and I'll use a glass of water for these 2 analogies. And some of you may have heard this before, but it carries value. The first, imagine holding a glass of water for a minute. Nothing happens. Imagine holding it for an hour. Your arm will begin to shake. You'll start to get sore. Imagine holding it for a full day. You would be in agony. You'd be able to not focus on anything but that glass of water. Now, the weight of the glass and the water does not change. But the longer you hold on to it, the heavier it becomes. The same goes for our thoughts and experiences. The longer we hold on to it, the heavier it becomes on our shoulders and our minds. So learn to let go. Learn what you carry with you and what you need to just leave behind. Second point, we've all heard the expression, optimists believe the glass is half full. Pessimists believe the glass is half empty. I challenge you to be that believer in yourself that your glass is always refillable. Thank you, everyone, for coming. I truly appreciate your time.
Thank you. We're good. Thank you, James. That was phenomenal. That's exactly what I expected and more, and I think relatable to everybody here. Do we have any questions? We have a few minutes. And I think, we're going to take at least 2. So start thinking. I'm going to walk around here. I'm going to go to Christina because I can put her on the spot and she's going to come up with a question while I walk over to her. And then we're going to have a couple more.
I can do it. That was really wonderful. Thank you so much for that really inspiring story and your story. And just knowing many first responders as well in my own life, do you have any suggestion on where to start? Like, you had some wonderful tips and I was trying to soak them all in, and I'm happy this is being recorded because I want to share it. But yeah, like that first step, what would you suggest?
Seek out someone who's done it, right? If you don't have to reinvent the wheel, there are people that have gotten through trauma and mental health, and like I said, it's rampant through the first responder profession right now, and the mental health profession as well. Seek someone who's done it, right? There's a clear formula for it, and really it's just to find that start point. That's the hardest part, and it's overwhelming. There's therapy, there's programming, you can Google anything, and you'll just be bombarded with self-help and self-care things. So it's just really to take that step. And my big thing that was really the catalyst for my change was I hated PTSD. I tolerated it for years, and for years it was my identity. But if you hate something, you won't tolerate it in your life. And I had to get to that rock bottom point of hating it, that I would no longer tolerate it. But if I could change my journey, it would have been to find someone who's gotten through it and use them as a soundboard, because that's essentially what I've been at my service.
Thanks. Yeah, just to echo what Christina said, really appreciate you being here and really commend you for sharing your story with all of us. It was wonderful. And my question kind of touches on Christina's too. During your talk, you were saying that while you were still actively, seeking that adrenaline rush after the traumatic experience, you were making statements about, wanting to die in the line of fire. And they were I got the sense that they were heard, but never really followed up on, like you said, by your colleagues. I was wondering, since that time to now, have you noticed that that kind of situation still occurs in police forces? And if things are better, what do you think has changed and made a difference? And if they are the same, maybe what are some things you think might help so that people can get that kind of help that they need if they show those signs that they're struggling? Thank you.
Thank you for that. Really, we're in a transitional phase. I see it. I see a very different mentality in the older generation and the younger generation. A lot still has to change. Like I said, you can have all the support systems you want, but that's not going to heal someone, right? People have to realize that they have to take that responsibility, because if they're not healing, it's not from a lack of resources, it's from a lack of resourcefulness. You have to want to search out and try everything. But really, it's to create that message with people coming into the profession. That's the biggest lesson I've learned, is we have people coming into in the policing profession, and when I'm speaking to them, you know what? I'm giving them a dose of reality. I came in thinking I was bulletproof. And when you tell them the percentages of mental health, of symptomology, right? And it's almost not if, it's when in this profession. It doesn't have to be completely debilitating, but it's going to impact you and change you. So to give them those lessons and to give them those supports, that it's okay to reach out. And when you give people permission, and that's the biggest thing, and that was so mind-blowing when I finally got back to work and I started doing talks in all of our lineups. And people would follow me out and follow me up. And that was just me giving them permission. And I think that's the biggest thing, especially in the helper field, which a lot of you are. We don't want to give ourselves permission if we're going through something, because I'm supposed to be that helper. I'm supposed to know all the right things to do, but sometimes life is just going to steer you in a way that you don't like, that throws you out of alignment. And it's just create that messaging that, you know what, there's help out there, and to really make it simple of where to go.
Thanks, Joe. Hi.
Hi.
Further to your point about the different generations and generational differences, what can we do as communities to raise little boys who grow up to be men who know that they can ask for mental health help?
It's a really good question. I think it's really just creating that conversation and normalizing it, that, you know, regardless if we're man or woman or whatever we identify as, we're all human. And suffering is part of the human experience. And that whole Renaissance mentality of suck it up, keep going, I said, it works until it doesn't. And I think now in this generation, we are finally having, men in powerful positions that are speaking up in what they're going through when years before you would have never heard this. And you create that conversation and you make it okay. And that's all you can really do, is just be that support system that shows that, whatever you're going through is valid. And a lot of us don't feel that way, but we have to feel that way and know that what we're going through, there's a reason for it. And there's support there, and let's work on it, but the support is there.
Thanks again for being here today. As I mentioned earlier, I know we called him Jimmy J, but James personally. And I think your story is important for a number of reasons. But when I knew you, you were, a basketball superstar. To quote like every movie and television, you would have been the guy who had it all. And then you go into your profession, where I think there's a lot of that as well. And I think, not that I am, it's very sad to hear what you've gone through. Obviously, I wouldn't wish that upon anybody, let alone somebody I care about. But to see what you've done, how far you've come, and the people you're going to help, I think, I don't even think you've scratched the surface to understand the difference you're making, because you represent a large portion of the stigma. People would look at you, look at your athletic ability, look at your success, and not think you have anything to worry about in terms of a mental health issue. And I think you're doing wonders for your profession. And I want to thank you for being here and sharing your story. And as I say to everybody else who comes and helps us out, I'm going to be bugging you again for other things. So and another note is, you mentioned a lot about your wife supporting you throughout this. Well, she's supporting you today. She's on YouTube posting comments as you're speaking throughout the day. So no, even though she's not here, she's also supporting you in Whitby today. So thank you very much. A couple of housekeeping items just before we wrap up. One, there's refreshments. Please stay, enjoy. As I mentioned, the survey, if you have a chance before you leave, just please fill it out, the post part of the pre and post survey. And lastly, tonight, in person and on YouTube, 7 p.m., we have our family and mental health series to kind of wrap up the day, wrap up Mental Health and Recovery Day at Ontario Shore. So thank you for being here today in person. Thank you for being online. And thank you for all you do for mental health. Have a great day.